Before we proceed, let us first ponder on this question. Is mathematics really largely a Greek and European creation? What might be the contributions of non-Western societies to the development of what is now known as mathematics? Is mathematics truly value-free and culture-free? How people view math in general remains largely Eurocentric. Mathematical ideas that have been developed over thousands of years are often attributed to and shaped by mainly Western male mathematicians. The history of mathematics generally follows a Eurocentric trajectory that views mathematics as an exclusive product of European civilization. Most people tend to focus math on Western cultures while ignoring indigenous knowledge and contributions. In Eurocentric mathematics, we have a tendency to see math as fixed. There is one algorithm, one trajectory, and one right answer. It values only one way of doing things, or it suggests that there is always one right way to do something. One field of study is committed to challenge the discourse of Eurocentrism in mathematics, and that is ethnomathematics. Ethnomathematics is a broad term for the connection between math and culture. Research in this field is committed to critiquing the dominant discourse that constructs Western mathematics as the mathematics, a singular mathematics that is both universal and value-free. Ethnomathematics reflects a concern for the social-cultural basis of mathematics, or the kind of mathematics that develops within a social-cultural environment. As a matter of fact, some scholars associate social-cultural mathematics with ethnomathematics, but the latter has a more extensive and determined research agenda surrounding politics, philosophy, history, education, and culture. One of the tasks of ethnomathematics is uncovering mathematical ideas embedded in cultural practices and artifacts. We are often surprised to see the multifarious and elegant ways that math has been and continues to be used beyond our narrow view. One example is the Incan quipus. Recall that we have discussed this number system from our previous lesson. The Incas had no writing system before, but they used knots and strings to represent numbers. Quipus are similar to graphs like in statistics. These methods led them to a more efficient farming, architecture, and organized economy. We all know that there are various cultural values embedded in the practice of basket weaving. Distinct patterns and designs have a cultural significance for a particular community. Moreover, essential mathematical ideas can be explored through weaving. It offers a way to experience basic concepts in geometry and number theory while encouraging the development of representation and modeling techniques which are fundamental mathematical skills. These pictures here show the different patterns of Mangyan baskets in Mindoro. Paulus Gurdes is an ethnomathematician from the Netherlands who became a professor of mathematics at the Eduardo Mondlane University in Mozambique. He was one of the pioneers of the task to reveal mathematical concepts entrenched in cultural traditions and artifacts. His work on culture, geometrical thinking, and mathematics education demonstrates how revealing mathematical ideas in cultural practice can lead to cultural affirmation and conscientization or the process of making others aware of political and social conditions. We also have mathematician Alan J. Bishop, who wrote Western Mathematics, the Secret Weapon of Cultural Imperialism. According to him, mathematical ideas are products of cultural history and social construction. Mathematics, as he argues, is a cultural product that exists not only in contemporary schools that uses typical Western mathematics, but also in indigenous communities all over the world. Here are some points to remember. Contributions to the field of mathematics come from diverse people all over the world. Many people of color who made important contributions to mathematics have been overlooked. Next, it is essential to understand and appreciate the value and importance of early systems that existed and still exist in indigenous groups or communities. Lastly, understanding various ethnomathematic systems can heighten our greater comprehension of mathematics in general, making us unrestrained by Western perspectives alone.
Math and technology has always been linked together, and today we usually see this in the applied fields of mathematics like economics and statistics as a tool to make calculations easier and more precise. Among the softwares used are Stata, Minitab, and Gretel to do statistical analysis. For some processes in calculus, some softwares are also used to get the calculations and figures for processes like finding the slope, the asymptotes, the intercepts, and etc. using software like GeoGebra. For finding the extrema, which is essential in the field of economics and business, we can use apps like Lindo. And even for creating beautiful tessellations and symmetry art that apply mathematical concepts, we have Kali. Unlike the pen and paper method in which most of us has learned mathematics, technology is also being integrated in teaching mathematics, especially in teaching children. The wider accessibility that most have nowadays has created a new vast platform that can be used in educating. For instance, an example is the work of Weijers, Jonker, and Rivgers in 2010 who used a location-based game called Mobile Math for mobile phones with GPS to allow students to create and explore quadrilaterals and their properties on a real playing field outside the classroom. Another is the use of iPads as a means to support elementary students in their learning of the concept of the angle. The students then analyze these images using dynamic geometry applications contained in their mobile devices. MOOCs, or Massive Open Online Courses, are now widely accessible in the public, and most of the older students in high school or college uses these open courses to augment their learning. Some examples may be that of Show Academy or Coursera. MOOCs allow participants to complete as much or as little of the course as they desire. MOOCs offer self-directed learning opportunities. Aside from this, an array of digital libraries are also available in the internet. Accessibility, interoperability, and reusability are the main features of these digital libraries. Some of the well-known learning resources in the online repositories are Merdot, or the Multimedia Educational Resources for Learning and Online Teaching, Whisk Online, DRI, Khan Academy, and EVA. The easy access to these sites allow teachers to use their resources in the classroom to help in their teaching. Technology as a tool for mathematical analysis and mathematical education. When we look at it this way, it doesn't seem bad, doesn't it? In fact, it would seem as if mathematics, like every other field, is benefiting from the advances caused by modernity and technology. The use of technology in mathematics has rapidly become a trend. However, issues would inevitably arise regarding the shift to the use of technology in teaching and learning, especially with regards to accessibility. This global pandemic has hastened the pace of the need to resort to online and technological means of learning, not only for math but for everything, with all countries left with no choice but to resort to these digital means. And one can already easily see the issues of this learning setup. During the last section, it was discussed how the perspectives of learning mathematics have been Western-centered, and the trends and new platforms of teaching too has been Western-centered as it only works for the more developed countries, as these mentioned trends have already been in place even before the pandemic. Yet problems arise in employing it into the education, especially in mathematics, within countries that are still used to the pen and pencil way of learning. From the relative inaccessibility of these developments would come the issue of possible unpreparedness and lack of knowledge of the teachers in facilitating and managing a digitally saturated classroom setup, which would definitely require some time and a learning curve to fully prepare for the facilitation of learning. However, it would seem that this is the trend today, not only for math but for everything, and the traditional ways of teaching is rapidly losing momentum.
Now let us proceed with the socioeconomic status as a determinant to success in mathematics. And for us to know how true is this in the field of mathematics, we're gonna look at Article 5, an excerpt from the report on the results of New Zealand's participation in the trends in international mathematics and science study. TIMSS measures trends in mathematics and science achievement at the 4th and 8th grades. In this article, it focuses on the trends in mathematics achievement in 4th grade from 1994 to 2006. In the study, there are proxy measures used to see how students' socioeconomic status affects their mathematics achievement, and 4 of these show significant results. These are the number of books in their home, number of educational resources, number of schools attended by the student, and the decile of the school they attend. The first proxy measure used is the number of books in the home. As shown in the graph, on average, there is a positive relationship between the number of books and the mean of students' mathematics score, which means the more books a student have, tendency is he or she will have a higher mathematics score. The second proxy measure used is the number of educational resources. Students were asked whether their home contained items from a list of 9: calculator, computer, study table, dictionary, internet connection, own room, own mobile phone, musical instruments, and dishwasher. This was done to measure the student's socioeconomic status and to give an indication of the availability of the educational resources at home. And as shown in the graph, the more educational resources a student have, the better he or she performs in mathematics. Another proxy measure used is the number of schools attended by the student. This may be indicative of the student's socioeconomic status, as the high mobility may be related to families who move regularly, be it for work or for any family reasons. On average, it can be seen in the graph that students with high mobility had lower achievement than those with low mobility. Lastly, the decile of the school they attend. A school's decile indicates the extent to which a school draws its student from low socioeconomic communities. In general, decile 1 schools are the schools with the highest proportion of students from socioeconomically disadvantaged communities, while decile 10 schools are the 10% of schools with the lowest proportion of students from these communities. And evidently, there is an indicative of a trend which shows that students who are socioeconomically disadvantaged were the ones with lower achievement in math compared to those wealthier communities. To conclude, students' performance in mathematics is significantly affected by their socioeconomic status, as students who are socioeconomically disadvantaged would only have limited to none resources, which will be very helpful not only in understanding mathematics but also in performing better in other academics, just like what other researchers suggest.
Pagkatapos nating aralin at malaman ang socio-economic status as determinant to success in mathematics, ating tignan at bigyan ng pansin ang mga isyong kinakaharap ng mga indigenous peoples towards math. So sa lesson ito, we will answer these following questions. How does mathematics reinforce discrimination? And how can mathematics help promote understanding of and respect for cultures? Before answering the questions in these lessons, kilalanin muna natin kung sino ang mga indigenous people. So according sa United Nations, there is no universally accepted definition for indigenous, though there are characteristics that tend to be common among indigenous people. First and foremost, indigenous people usually have their own language, cultures, and traditions influenced by living relationships with their ancestral homelands. Secondly, indigenous people have distinctive cultural traditions that are still practiced. Third, indigenous people have their own land and territory to which they are tied in myriad ways. So last but not the least, indigenous people self-identify as indigenous. So it must be noted that the term indigenous has prevailed as a generic term for many years. In some countries, there may be preference for other terms including tribes, First Peoples and Nations, Aboriginals, or ethnic groups. Occupational and geographical terms like hunter-gatherers, nomads, peasants, or hill people also exist, and for all practical purposes, can be used interchangeably with indigenous people. Dapat nating tandaan that the most fruitful approach is to identify rather than define indigenous people. According to the United Nations, this is based on the fundamental criterion of self-identification as underlined in a number of human rights documents. Ngayon nga't naliwanagan tayo kung anong definasyon ng indigenous people, tignan naman natin ang mga IPs around the world. So as you can see from the screen are the Inuit of Arctic. In America naman are the White Mountain Apache of Arizona. And from the deep jungle of Amazon are the Yanomami people. At sa Africa are the Maasai in East Africa. So far from the south are the Aboriginal people of Australia. Ngayon naman, dumako tayo sa Pilipinas. So as you can see from the video, these pictures are the Igorots, which we are familiar of, especially here in UP Baguio. And last but not the least, I also included the Mangyans in the island of West Central Philippines since napaka-essential ng role nila sa pag-establish ng IP education sa ating bansa. Ano na nga ba yung estado ng IPs and educational system, including math subjects sa ating bansa? Accordingly, the need for schools for indigenous students is dire, as IP communities are often located in remote areas far from any public schools. And too often, IP children face discrimination in these schools. Researchers such as Alagwe has heard stories about Mangyan children in Occidental Mindoro making long journeys to the closest public school riding on the roof of a jeepney, only to have their teacher call them stupid and ignorant during school assemblies. So is it any wonder then that IP students lose any motivation to continue their schooling and spend a life merely surviving? So basically, yung estado nila is napaka-discriminatory. So furthermore, as researchers have further explained, through colonization, the IP's knowledge system were supplanted by Western knowledge systems. These include mathematics, which despite being called the universal language and the door and key of the sciences, that makes it seem removed from things like cultural bias, So it is mostly Western and mostly Eurocentric. Dahil nga sa mga isyung ito, the Philippine government then decided to institutionalize IP education in 2011 with the issuance of Department Order No. 62, also known as the National Indigenous Peoples Education Policy Framework by the Department of Education. One of the policy statements in this framework is to adopt appropriate basic education pedagogy, content, in assessment through the integration of indigenous knowledge system and practices in all learning areas and processes. Basically, efforts are underway in developing math curricula consistent with the goals of this policy. In particular, math teachers are expected to develop math lessons that are localized and contextualized to indigenous culture in order to make math accessible to all students. Bago pa man ma-institutionalize ng ating gobyerno ang IP education sa ating bansa, several groups, institutions, and communities have already embarked on the challenge of making education relevant to indigenous students. One such program is Pamanaka, or also known as the Paaralang Mangyan na angkop sa kulturang aalagaan, an indigenous school built in 1999 by and for the Mangyan community in San Jose Occidental, Mindoro. At Pamanaka, IP education is done right. For example, it has an IP curriculum they call Banig ng Buhay that is anchored on the life of the Mangyan community, where lessons in different subjects are developed around a yearly calendar of activities approved by the community elders. So basically, math comes to life in the Mangyan tradition. For instance, a lesson on fraction begins with a discussion on honey harvesting practices in each student's community and ends with a reflection on the values of sharing and fairness. Sa sitwasyong ito, nakikita na natin yung interconnectedness ng math at culture. Moreover, in the Pamanaka project, Article 6 provides a brief discussion on the experiences of the indigenous peoples in the Philippines with mainstream education. It presents the experience of Pamanaka as a successful model of school that provides culturally relevant mathematics education to its Mangyan students. So, in conclusion, math then isn't separate from culture. Basically, math is culture.
Now, we will discuss about mathematics education, how math is taught, specifically with Aboriginal students. Learning mathematics is beneficial to all as it provides structure and strategies for solving life problems. Some factors affecting mathematical learning include history, socioeconomic background, race, and culture. Mathematics education concerns the practice of teaching and learning mathematics. One of the important goals is to develop a mathematically literate society. Note that being a mathematically literate is having the knowledge and ability to apply basic mathematics in our daily lives. Thus, teaching mathematics is a crucial undertaking to build a mathematically literate citizenry. Mathematics education problematizes how math is taught effectively and how learning takes place. It is a complex field that looks at how philosophical, psychological, historical, political, socioeconomic, and cultural issues affect the practice of teaching and learning math. Stavros, the Mathematics Outreach Coordinator for the University of Saskatchewan's Department of Mathematics and Statistics, addresses a way to contextualize mathematics and bring indigenous narratives into the subject. He teaches mathematics to grade 6 students in a way that accommodates their experiences and backgrounds and challenges forms of oppression in the classroom. It's anti-oppressive math education, he says. The learning starts with a colorful PowerPoint like pictures of nature, where they also discuss about indigenous knowledge and the connection that Aboriginal people have with nature. For example, he asks his students what sort of branching pattern do they notice on a fern leaf, or lungs, and the lightning. the students would answer that they noticed that smaller portions of the leaf resemble larger portions. And then, he would introduce mathematical terms like fractals, where general patterns are repeated. Fractal patterns are pervasive in nature, and we are more connected with them than we might know. Teaching mathematics in this way, rather than just using the textbook and asking the students to follow along, is more effective for Aboriginal math education because a lot of students don't connect with Western style of teaching. This means that students feel disconnected in an environment if they just listen to a teacher putting facts in their brain. Math ideas enter their brain, but they don't imagine using it with their daily lives. In general, Aboriginal knowledge, Aboriginal ways of teaching and knowing are different than Western knowledge, and with this, there comes a conflict in math learning. Aboriginal math education is a collaborative process between a Western knowledge system and an indigenous knowledge system. Mathematics education is something that should be accessible to everybody, so giving voice to silenced cultures is a must.
Mathematics education is also a complex theoretical field. Questions about how language, gender, socioeconomic status, and race are active research areas. The mathematics curriculum, which concerns what mathematical knowledge needs to be taught and how it should be taught, is seen to be a political undertaking, influenced by the current political atmosphere and determined by the prevailing or dominant worldview. In this part, we are going to look at mathematics externally, which is concerned with the embeddedness of mathematics education and mathematics within historical, cultural, social, and political contexts and what these imply. First, we need to know two proponents. The first proponent is Eric Rico Goodstein. He is a professor in University of Illinois at Chicago. The main focus of his studies is mathematics education. In his article, Mathematics as a Weapon in Struggle, he applies, or rather reinvents, Paulo Freire's principle. The second proponent is Paulo Freire. He is a Brazilian educator and philosopher who was a leading advocate of critical pedagogy. He is best known for his influential work, Pedagogy of the Oppressed. He also challenges other educators to follow his practice. But he states that in order to follow him, one essentially must not follow him. Instead of following, Freire urged reinvention, which he wrote demands the historical, cultural, political, social, and economic comprehension of the practice and proposals to be reinvented. What he means by this is we do not just apply a set of principles or practice, rather we reinvent it based on the context of where we are applying it. Because in order to move social struggles forward, we must be able to understand or know our own lives and the objective conditions of our own realities. The context. This spirit of reinvention guides Goodstein's approach in a mathematics class in a Chicago public high school. He called this using mathematics as a weapon in the struggle. That students needs to be prepared through their mathematics education to investigate and critique injustice and to challenge in words and actions oppressive structures and acts. Now what Goodstein's attempted here in study is to apply the concept of culture circle by Freire in the Chicago Public High School. Freire's contexts were literacy and post-literacy campaigns, explicitly and radically political, which often took place through culture circles. Culture circles are qualitatively different from schools. Instead of a teacher, they have coordinators. Instead of lectures, they have dialogues. Instead of pupils, they have group participants. And instead of alienating syllabi, they have compact programs that were broken down and codified into learning units. Furthermore, there were no tests, let alone high-stakes assessments. passing grades, in-grade retention, or more to the point, educational failure. In various settings, performance standards would have been nonsense, and neoliberal ideas of privatizing public education, parents as educational consumers in the marketplace, and profits being extracted from school would have been downright retrograde. The very purpose of education here was for liberation and humanization. But unlike Clarion culture circles, the mathematics literacy campaign, so to speak, of US public education, much like in Chicago, emphasizes technological innovation for US economic competitiveness, global market supremacy, capital accumulation, and increased productivity, all to benefit the wealthiest. These campaigns' politics are reactionary and racist in that they serve and enrich US capital and corporate or financial elites, primarily at the expense of low-income and working-class people and people of color within the US. Now this is the condition and the reality of the US public education. Now this is the challenge here. How are you going to reinvent parent culture circles in a Chicago public school math class? Now I'm going to show you the takeaways of Christine's study here, because it would be too long and tedious to explain it all in detail. But if you want to read his whole study, a copy of his work is provided in the link below. First, it is clear that there is difficulty here on his work because of the high-stakes, accountability-driven madness enveloping US schools, exacerbated by neoliberal and education privatization efforts. He recognizes that district, school, and state mandates constrain teachers, but he also understands that understanding the roots of existing constraints helps us overcome barriers through collective agency, and that there are always spaces in which to act even in modest ways. Teachers wanting to teach mathematics or social justice can start small, politicize simple situations, and share and collaborate with others. Second, navigating what he calls the dance between teaching social justice context and teaching mathematics is complicated, fluid, and challenging. At times, his mathematics class resembled a social justice class devoid of mathematics. At times, it looked like a reformed mathematics class lacking social-political context. He states that teachers need the patience to realize that this is a developmental process. It takes time and experience for both teachers and students to create a pedagogy of questioning and to co-create a classroom that supports teaching and learning critical mathematics. At its most fundamental level, they task as teachers to have a political stance and the commitment to stand in solidarity with students in the struggle of their communities for justice. Third, that there is this obvious distinction between developing curriculum and teaching it. The literature is clear that even veteran teachers have to learn to teach reform curriculum. Yes, curriculum may be adaptable, but teachers have to make that happen, partnering with their students to concretize and study their own specific context. There are no shortcuts here. Fourth, there are no blueprints either. He states that we make this road while walking and will not find answers in a book. We can build on existing learnings, but we also have to collaborate to produce new knowledge in this field. We can draw on the research on mathematics teaching and learning, which Gustein does, but he states this is not necessary. It is in no way sufficient. Generic critical thinking in mathematics is fundamentally different from critical literacy in mathematics. Furthermore, the mainstream mathematics education community overlooks these questions, and the reform by themselves can even exacerbate inequality. And fifth, he states that using generative themes or political pedagogical project as starting points in the classroom not only demands genuine democracy, but also helps create it. When teachers elicit generative themes from students and use them to develop liberatory curriculum, They instigate a dialectical process that opens a space for deep student engagement. And when students take this up, as they did in Gustain's class, they help make democracy be a cornerstone of the setting and participate in remaking education as the cornerstone, as the practice of freedom. And Gustain's final conclusion for his study here is that the purpose of reading and writing the world, with or without mathematics, is for social political change, to end oppression, exploitation, and exclusion, and for full humanization and liberation. In his view, the struggle of the world's people needs to be against our present and political economic system that is the root of racism, sexism, homophobia, and other discriminations that cause so much pain to its students and countless others.
So to sum it all up, mathematics as we know it is Eurocentric. This thinking alienates minorities. The success in mathematics is not only tied to inherent intelligence, a lot of factors determines it. Socioeconomic status and ethnicity are examples. And with the advent of new technologies, which to many is considered an equalizer, may further leave the minorities behind. All these factors make it important to change the way we look at mathematics education. Mathematics needs to be contextualized for it to be properly delivered to disadvantaged minorities. This incentivizes us to abandon the Eurocentric mathematics. And now that success in mathematics is deeply woven into the historical, cultural, social, and political identities of a person, this renders mathematics as a tool for social justice.